Good afternoon, everyone. Recording this before Christmas, knowing you're going to hear it after Christmas is a little strange, but thank you, Tim, for what was undoubtedly a great introduction, and I hope that you all had a great Christmas. We're here to open the session on dealer sustainability, and so I want to look at that against the background of the change that we all recognize is coming and what dealers can actually do in order to mitigate those implications or even sort of push back against some of them. For those of you who don't know ICDP, we're a research and consulting organization. The heart of what we do and have done for almost 30 years is a collaborative research program looking at the future of the automotive sales and after-sales sector over sort of a 5 to 10 year period. So we're not so much focused on day-to-day operational detail, but more about the decisions that need to be taken now in order to prepare for the future. The program is supported by a wide range of members. So you'll see that on the right-hand side of the slide, and that's a wide range of the manufacturers, a good selection of large private distributors, importers, and dealer groups and the dealer associations, and then a number of after-sales players and other parties involved like IT providers, platform operators, and so on. And so we get insight from all of those members, which helps us to provide a broad view as to what's happening and what's going to be happening in the future. And the results are shared with the members through a variety of formats and meetings. So there's some examples down there at the bottom. If we look at the long-term pressures that are facing the distribution sector, then I think we would all recognize the three that are shown on the slide at the moment. So digitalization is really about all the changes that we see around us: online sales, customer buying behavior, connected cars. Digitalization affects almost every single part of the sector. The relationships are fundamentally those that govern relationships between the manufacturers and the dealers, but there are also other aspects of the relationships with third-party platforms, the relationships between the franchise and independent sector, and so on. And then there's a product and technology change, so everything that's happening in the product itself, in the technology that's available to us to support the sales process or after sales, and how that will change what we do and the resources that we need to use that well. And so in the presentation, I'm going to go through each of those briefly, just to talk a little bit more about them and the response to them. If that wasn't enough, then we have a whole range of other more specific issues which compound those challenges. So on the globalization side, sitting now watching this live, then you will know better than I do today what actually happened with Brexit. But regardless of deal or no deal, then there will be ramifications for the sector. And we can only speculate, even as we go into next year, as to what that will finally mean in terms of local manufacturing and so on. The coronavirus pandemic, I'm confident, will still be a current issue in January and will remain so for some months to come. And we've dealt with it better than we feared was going to be the case back in April or May, but it doesn't alter the fact that we've learned a lot about how something can come out of the blue like COVID and knock us completely off track. In 2021, we're in the second year of the new emissions environment for Europe. We saw in 2020 how that affected the product that was offered, the availability of product, the incentives that were offered on different products, and that's going to continue and become tougher as some of the special dispensation that's available in certain types of powertrain, certain sizes of manufacture and so on start to reduce. We're also moving through on the block exemption review, the general block exemption, which covers all forms of retail, but will be particularly relevant to us in areas like online retail, will move forward first, and we would expect by about June that we'll have some sort of idea as to what that's going to spell out in terms of the changes that come into effect the following year. The automotive block exemption, which is more focused on after sales, will have an effect then the following year in 23. But all of that creates some uncertainty and some nervousness about the environment that we face. And then we have the new entrants who are coming on board. So Mr. Chesterman tells us that we're all a load of dinosaurs and he has a better way of selling used cars. We'll see how that pans out in 2021, but it doesn't alter the fact that they will, with the backing that they have, take some of the market. Others are making similar moves. Everyone is upping their game in the used car sector. On the new car side, we have people like Link and Ineos and others who are bringing new products to market and using different types of channels, different approaches to do that, including more use of leasing. And then we've got completely new players like Fair in the US and others who are trying to put forward a subscription model. So we have a lot going on to deal with. If we turn first to digitalization, last year there was, a lot of change that was adopted by both manufacturers and dealers in order to work our way around and through the pandemic sort of lockdown. So you're all familiar with that, but video calls, live chat, virtual showrooms, personalized walk around of a car that you're watching live and you can interact with the agent, doing remote trade-in appraisals, making online payments, home deliveries, unaccompanied test drives, whole range of things, all of which existed before, but most people didn't use, become much more widespread, much more mainstream. But one of the things that we found from that was actually joining up all those different bits was an issue, that some of the existing systems were a bit clunky, and we were trying to put these quite smart tools onto an existing sort of back end. But we also learned that we can be more efficient. And so the data on the right-hand side of the slide comes from the US, from a study conducted by NADA and the Roadster, US online channel provider. And I'm not going to go through all of the numbers. You'll get the presentation afterwards from AM, but the number of consumers completing the sale online, which bits they were doing online and which bits were faster, and a better customer experience, all moved forward. And the productivity shown in the bubbles at the bottom improved substantially. And that's really because the customers understood that they booked their slot with the salesperson. They didn't just turn up on a Saturday. They booked their slot. They were seen to, they self-served quite a lot more of the process. And so the end result was that the salespeople were able to process more transactions, run transactions in parallel than they could have done in the past. So some important lessons learned there. But if we actually look at the whole area of digitalization, then what's a given is that the customers expect what's called the omni-channel experience. They expect to be able to switch between online and physical and do so in a way which suits them. And although COVID may move the needle to some extent, there is still a very substantial majority of new car buyers of all age groups, all genders, all geographies, who want to do some and some, but they don't necessarily all want to do the same things online and the same things physically, but they do want omnichannel, the ability to use all the channels in a flexible way. And where we then get into issues is that each manufacturer then wants to have their preferred seamless customer experience coming down vertically on the chart, and each one will in some way be different to the next, and they'll make different IT choices to the other manufacturers. Meanwhile, the dealer groups and even smaller owner-operator dealer groups tend often to be multi-brand, and so they need to match their systems that give them a view across the business horizontally and support things like used cars and after sales, need to mesh in with the vertical requirements of the manufacturer. And we don't just have a DMS system and a retail platform, we also have a whole load of point solutions that have developed over the years to handle specific aspects of your own website, but also things like parts or workshop scheduling or video and so on. And getting those together is into one coherent system in the broad sense of the word is a challenge. And we can't just keep on putting sticking plasters on the old legacy and make it work. What we expect to see is that the systems in general, particularly the manufacturer systems, will move into the cloud so that there's controlled access for the manufacturer, for all of the dealers, for the customers, for any other partners who need to have access to that. And each of those will be network specific. But then when it comes into the dealer's environment, then it will be plugging into the dealer's choice of DMS and any other tools that they use. And we need to have that sort of many-to-many sort of integration with the role of the DMS being reduced and so being more focused on the used cars, after sales and sort of business management. Moving on to networks, there's no question that network relationships will change. We have, even in the UK, too many dealers to support the requirements of the modern customer. Customers will drive further than they used to buy a car. They want to use online. They're limiting their brand choice down through online research. And so things need to change in terms of the physical network, reducing the sales coverage, maintaining after sales coverage, because customers still want after sales within a convenient distance, much the same as they did 5 or 10 years ago. So that's not changed. One of the solutions, and one which gives a very simple solution at one level to the omnichannel problem, is to move to agency. And agency is where the customer's relationship for the sales contract is with the manufacturer. And the manufacturer then determines the price, whether the customer is buying online or physically, and they have the direct contractual relationship. The dealer, now agent, handles the face-to-face interactions, provides the test drive, and so on. And things have really moved up a gear. You know, agency is not new, but it's moved up a gear in the last 1 or 2 years, and we expect it to accelerate going forward because we see bigger pilots being run in more significant markets across all products. There's a roadmap that's been announced by some of the manufacturers, like Mercedes, for example, that tells us when the next market is going to go to agency. It's disruptive in the sense that they're prepared to go in and change the fundamental relationship across the whole of the network. And they need to look at how that transition works. Do they provide some guarantees to the dealers? They need to get behavioral change on the part of the dealers as entities, but also the salespeople working within the dealers and their own people sitting back in the national sales companies. The clear intent is to provide the omni-channel experience, is to allow them to share data more easily in the environment of GDPR. It gives them the pricing consistency. It means the processes can be joined up. The IT solution can be across the whole of the network. From the customer's point of view, what they get is transparency. The price is the price at a particular point in time for a particular product. And they get the choice of channel. They get the choice of products because you're accessing the national inventory rather than just one dealer's inventory. And the dealers compete on the basis of service rather than price. So we think agency has many benefits. It also has many challenges. So for the manufacturers where agency is a step too far, then they will still modify the existing franchise model in order to address the needs of the different customer journeys. You know, shown here, customer journey 1, customer journey 2. And omnichannel requires, supporting both of those different journeys, requires that the customer can freely choose when to switch. The data is shared so that whoever is on the left-hand side of that slide, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's a dealer, whether it's online, whether it's offline, they know where the customer has got to, they know the customer's identity, they know the vehicle of choice, and so on. And everybody gets a fair reward for their contribution to each customer journey that results in a sale. And the way that that will happen is basically by reducing the base margin, by putting in bonuses that support and incentivize omni-channel behavior, and to provide some support for the fixed costs that the dealer is carrying in the physical channel, even while some customers might be doing some or most of their journey in the online channel. So there's a solution, but it still creates pressures back on the dealer. Finally, if we move to the technology side, then we're all aware of the growing technical complexity of the cars. And this chart has just got a few examples. So if we look at the left-hand side, then the large grey section that's declining is internal combustion engine. And you see that on the sales part, globally, that will come down to around 40% by 2030. If you look at the UK, if the government follows through with their plans, then for the UK, that would actually come down to 0 by 2030. And then plug-in hybrids and other hybrids, battery electric vehicles, you know, just a little bit of fuel cell potentially makes up the balance in growing proportions. And that looks quite scary initially, but you have to remember that every car that, or virtually every car that's being sold this year in 2021 will still be on the road in 2030. It will still need service, it will still need parts, they will still crash and need repair for the collision damage. But this scale of change is huge. And if you look at the top right-hand side, then the modern sort of top-end car, a BMW or a Mercedes, you know, Jaguar, has something like 100 million lines of code to make the car function, which is substantially more than airliner, substantially more than a satellite that's going around and that we rely on for, you know, connected cars and other things. There's around 40 electronic control units in the vehicle, doing everything from managing engine functions to suspension to cruise control and so on. And these numbers have been doubling every 2 or 3 years. So cars are going to get more and more complex. And then in the bottom right, you see the size of the ADAS technology market. So all the driver assistance aids like cruise control, lane keeping, blind spots, and emergency braking and so on, that the value of that over this decade is going to roughly quadruple. It's going up by 13% each year across the main market. So all of that creates pressures across the sector. For the manufacturers who are paying for the investment, for the dealers who sell the cars and have to explain what all this functionality is about and give the customer appropriate guidance, and for the repairers who keep them on the road or get them back on the road after an accident. So there are broad implications for dealers, and it's mainly on the after-sales side, but even on the new car sales side, then margins on the battery electric vehicles are typically lower, and that has a substantial effect as the percentage mix increases, both for sales and after sales, investment in equipment and training, reduced service content and margins. You've got no oil in a pure battery electric vehicle, and that's high profit element of the mix. And ADAS means that the accident rate will reduce, but the repair itself becomes more complex because of the need to recalibrate equipment. But the situation is not perhaps as bad as people fear. So there are responses either by the manufacturers or dealers and repairers to address that. So for the BEVs, OEMs are considering agency as a way to get around the margin pressure on dealers, but also address some other points to do with how they promote those cars and manage the residual values and so on. So you see that with Volkswagen on the ID range, for example. We expect that dealers and independent repairers will specialize more in certain brands so that they're not carrying all of the capability in every location to do every type of job. And the reduced service content and margins, then the response to that is to try and improve retention. So that doesn't mean that everybody can be a winner, but it means that if you're taking the actions to succeed by more service plans, good customer care, and so on, then you can hold your position and potentially improve on it. So you might feel that you're sort of hemmed in on all sides by all these different pressures, and it brought to mind the classic scene at the end of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where Butch proposes that they head off for Australia, and the classic line, "For a moment I thought we were in trouble." It didn't end well for them. We're not suggesting that the same will be true for dealers. The manufacturers are in the driving seat for a number of the critical challenges that are ahead. They need to manage supply and demand better than they have done in the past, and they need to take some of the tough decisions that they haven't taken in the past. They need to come up with a roadmap that says this is how we're going to provide the omnichannel experience in a world where the dealers are consolidating, they're becoming bigger, more of them are multi-brand. They can't just dictate a solution, it has to be something that fits. The manufacturers also need to review all the factors that are driving cost in, take some of those lessons from the pandemic and hold on to those. That they're not encouraging dealers or requiring dealers to do things that don't add value. The same thing with putting the investment in the areas where customers have shown interest. Customers have demonstrated they don't really mind about not being able to come to a grand palace in order to buy the car. They're willing to take alternative routes. There's some functionality that they want to the dealership. It doesn't have to be in the grandest of surroundings. And importantly, they need to be upfront with the dealers that they work with and decide now who they're going to keep and who doesn't fit into their view of the future. Because that's better for everyone concerned. It's better for the people who stay, because they can plan with some confidence and decide on making investments with confidence. But they also, for those who are not going to be part of that future, they can say, fine, they can make a graceful exit, but they can also focus on the relationships where they are the chosen partner going forward. But for the dealers, there's a number of areas where even whilst all of that's going on in the OEM side, there are things that they can be doing and should be doing. So the first one, if you are a chosen strategic partner, if the manufacturer has come back to you and said, I would like you to take over this market area, create the network in that area, then work in a positive way to make omnichannel work. You have to accept that the manufacturers will be more involved in retail than they have been in the past. The second is to search out cost reductions and efficiencies. Look at what all the lessons learned during the pandemic. Go back to stuff that's been around for years, like the lean dealer work that we've done within ICDP, and apply those lessons now to get the cost base down, to get the operation as slick and lean as it can be, and offer the customer the experience that they want. You've got to expand the digital presence in the areas that you can do. You can't necessarily get so directly involved in new cars without the manufacturer the lead, but you can do a great job on used cars and after sales. It is your 24/7 dealership, and it should have rich functionality. It should attract and engage customers. And although there are some dealers who are doing a great job, there are others who still lag, and they need to get their act together on that one. And in getting their act together, then it's also going to support the development of your team. Your team need to have digital skills. They need to be able to interact as well with customers online, through email, on the phone, as they do face-to-face. And that is vital, whilst recognizing that in the end, customers relate to salespeople. They relate to that human touch, and that still remains important. It's not a vending machine operation when you talk about selling a car or even servicing it. So 4 key actions which we think you should be taking now. Hopefully that's helpful, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Automotive Management Live virtual Q&A session for the dealer sustainability presentation, which we've just watched, which is hosted by Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP. I'm Tom Sharp, News and Features Editor at AM Magazine, and I'm joined today by Steve, who's here to take your questions, alongside Stuart Miles, who's Managing Director for the UK and Ireland at CDK Global. Both Stuart and Steve will be answering your questions and exploring a few of the topics that have been put before us in the seminar that you've just seen. We've already had quite a bit of engagement and a few questions have come in to us. So if you guys are ready to take these questions, I'll put a couple to you. Is that all right?
Sure,
of course. Yeah,
great stuff. That's what we're here for. I'll kick off with a question from Charlotte. Charlotte, thanks for your question today. She says, I guess this addressed to you initially, Steve. When you mentioned that a customer will want after sales to remain within a reasonable distance, what is the optimum distance after sales should be from a customer? How far should they be expected to travel?
Our market research across Europe and UK is consistent with others, is roughly 30 minutes, so a little bit over 30 minutes, and it's extended a little over the last 8 years that we've been running our own consumer research, but it's been stable, whereas the journey time for a new car purchase has gone out. But it's worth saying that what they're after is convenience, and so it may be that it's half an hour from a service point, or it may be that you find another way to provide the service, such as a mobile technician.
Of course, times are very different now as well, so I guess as you say, it's horses for courses. If there is a solution online, then that might be appropriate as well. I guess, Stuart, you've seen people who perhaps less likely to just walk into a dealership have increased the business that sort of CDK's platforms have seen in dealerships over the last 10 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if throughout the whole physical journey that the consumer has, you have to maximise that opportunity. And we caught up earlier and watching some of the previous presentations. We've spoke about the importance of having that digital presence, not just in the sales part, but back to the question, which is within that after sales point. Because actually, if you're making that consumer experience more of a connected journey, then they are more likely to possibly travel further, even further than that 30 minutes. But you need to have a good digital presence. You need to ensure that it's easy for the customer to use you, and if that's the result, then they will travel beyond their nearest dealer to get a better service. We know that consumers right now are valuing service far more than price than ever before, and therefore you need to react to that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, on a new car purchase, then the journey times have extended out to almost an hour, and that reflects what Stuart was just saying, that the customers have done a lot of online research, 16 hours by our research. They're heavily committed to the brand that they've chosen, and so having spent 16 hours of research to drive an hour to actually go and finally check the car out is trivial. And the other aspect of our research is that they will drive past other brands they've considered to get to the one they've chosen, which again makes sense because they've invested personal energy and time and discussion with friends and family and looking at reviews to get down to that choice of brand. So they'll make that journey, and they feel more confident because of all the information they've got.
Yeah. I guess every journey is under close scrutiny at the moment, isn't it? You wouldn't want to risk a £200 fine to get your car serviced, would you? At the moment, that's quite a subsidy. Like I say, we've got a few questions, so I'll move on to one of the others. Certainly, on a hot topic, one that I saw a few questions pop into the inbox with yesterday. This person, thank you, it's James Cooper, asks, how will agency contracts affect dealers' used car operations? Will dealers keep used car retailing as a separate entity, or will OEMs be involved more there too? Interesting thing to consider. We think of it in the new car arena really first and foremost, but what will the effect be on used sales as well? Steve, I guess you should perhaps broach that first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge subject, but very, very quickly in terms of the principles, if the manufacturer wants to have consistent pricing, no haggle pricing, then the deal as a whole has to be consistent, and that means that in a perfect world, you would say that the manufacturer offers the part exchange value. The manufacturer initially takes title to the car, even if he immediately sells it back to the dealer who handled the sale. That's not always how it's been set up so far. And even if you set it up that way, there's nothing to stop the dealer with the customer in front of him with his car splitting the two and doing his own deal, doing the over allowance in the traditional way and giving the customer a better deal than his colleague down the road. So there's implications from how it's set up, but it still means the manufacturers will be more involved, even if it's only as a contractual intermediary that passes the used car through to the dealer. There are extensions of the model, which would mean that particularly on lease cars, where the lease cars being defleeted at 3 years are also being sold through agency. And in our experience, that's where the manufacturers will have to tread very carefully, because the dealers are relatively relaxed about agency on the right terms for new cars, but very defensive of their used car business. So any manufacturer who tries to do that, at least in the near term till everything's settled, is going to have a very, very convincing case for the dealer that their business as a whole is still protected.
Yeah, yeah. And Stuart, could you share your sort of view, whatever thoughts you've had on agency model? I bet it's really sort of interesting to think how it could potentially affect your own business as well.
Yeah, of course. I think the reality is it's coming. We need to accept that, and therefore you need to look at the benefits that fundamentally is going to bring. It's there at the moment. So network relationships will change. Steve mentioned that within his video. The agency model. I know there is some concern about brand protection right now amongst some retailers but again, I go back to earlier, you can grow your own brand, so that shouldn't necessarily worry the confident retailers. What I would say, though, is that the fight is on with the data, because the argument of who owns the customer, well, through an agency agreement, it's the OEM that will own the customer. So therefore, where does that, if accepted by the customer, where does that data sit? Yeah, so I know who wants that data. Everybody, yeah, everybody would be fighting for that. So there needs to be a way of working going forwards, and the reward for good service that is being provided. I think where we sit within that, I mean, as a gateway to the retail, as an retail operating platform, I think we have a role to play within that, where we can start to triangulate, whether be that through the OEM, the retailer, and ourselves, and then come up with some meaningful way and process for retaining future business within those brands.
Just going back to you, Steve. Is agency a threat to certain independents, do you think, if OEMs choose to really control that used cycle? I guess there's an appeal in that, in the impact they can have on residuals and things like that. They would look to maintain control of used cars, and those independents that look to sell nearly new right now, would they potentially be muscled out, do you think?
Yeah, yes, and I think that there's a couple of trends on the used car side that are put the independents in a more challenging position, and agency is one of them. But the more that the manufacturer or the franchise dealers are controlling the new car sale and its remarketing at the end, then the more likely, that's going to decrease the supply of vehicles coming onto the market over 3 or 4 years. You've got people like LeasePlan, Hertz, and others who are defleeting their cars through a private sale or a private lease option, so they're not coming into the market in the same way. And if a manufacturer does go agency and they want to get, and they are more directly incurring the problems of oversupply, then it should throttle back that level of oversupply, and therefore the pre-reg and nearly new market. So that bit comes out of the equation as well. So taking all that up together, then I think that it is more difficult for the big independents, and they need to try and find ways to lock in their supply, perhaps from direct deals with large fleets. But then in a COVID time with less business travel, what's the future for large business fleets?
Absolutely. We've got another question coming, which does impact. It covers the independence question, really. It says in 2035, won't dealers need fewer workshops but staffed with electronics and software technicians rather than the current skill set that they've got? And how will independents be able to compete? I guess mostly, dealer training is at the core of the latest EV technology. So Steve, how do you think the way the sector is going is going to challenge the independent sector?
Independents over the years have consistently always upgraded the skills and the technology and capability whenever the business case was there for them. So are they capable, or were they capable of fixing an EV a year or 2 years ago? No, not because they couldn't, but because there was no point, because they weren't seeing the cars. I was speaking to one of the big franchise chains just before Christmas. Their most popular course last year by far was BEVs. And so now that the park's beginning to increase and the opportunities there, then they're upgrading their skills and they're spending money on multi-brand equipment and so on to handle it. So there's nothing to stop an independent, particularly if they're either as a large group or aligned with one of the good franchise operators, to keep up with the technology. And yes, they'll have a future. The skills will change. That applies right the way across.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess that is one of the new the trends that the sector has to adapt to. And Stuart, you've seen all sorts of trends in the last 10 months, sort of manifesting themselves. Things that have I guess increased the traction of CDK. In your business, it's not EVs, but the shift to more digital trading, isn't it? So, you know, are the two things aligned? Does the EV become a white good that people are more happy to transact with online? You know, how do you see the business in digital terms developing over the next 12 months and 2 years ahead?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I see there's another question there from Frank about the future. Should we be excited or fearful about this technology, or electrification, etc.? I think we should be very excited about that, and not, to your point, concerned or fearful. And actually, the next 2 or 3 years is vital, but we need to be looking at the next 5 to 10 years as well. So we've all got our concerns about tomorrow's targets, but we need to think about 5 years' time for the sustainability, which is the title of this. So I'm going to wrap a few things up into this, if you don't mind. But I think the key to becoming more digital is by having the correct staff in place that understands the fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve as a digital business, or what you're trying to achieve to take on the new technology. Because without that staff and the change in process and the training that you have to put into that new ways of working, then you will never be successful if you just look to implement new technology onto your platform. Yeah, so for me, it's vital that we get used to these new ways of working. We get excited about it. We look at the more virtual sales appointments, as we've seen in the last 10 months, becoming more and more use of the new platforms and the systems, and people should be confident to be able to use that. But don't just focus on that point to the nice glory stuff of the front end sale. Yeah, you've got the whole process to consider through from how you're managing your parts through to workshop and so on and so forth. So for me, I think the role of digital is an exciting future for us. I think the way that you train your staff and align to those processes, I'm repeating myself here because it's so important. And therefore, coming back to your question, we need to embrace this. We need to learn what we've learned over the last 10 months and understand how that will be in the situation of whatever the new norm will be. And only then will we be successful.
So embracing it, staff engagement and buy-in is a key factor. I think that was certainly a takeaway from what you've just told us, I guess. There was another question about agency, Steve, and we are down to seconds really, so I'm sorry to put this to you right at the end, but I did an interview with Dash Gupta yesterday. He was really positive about agency, and this person also saying in terms of stock holding and cash flow, it can really benefit the main dealer. So, I mean, is there going to be much kickback still, or is it like the Brexit deal? There'll need to be a lot of negotiations to make the transition smooth.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of negotiations. That's in the nature of the relationship. But if the manufacturers are thorough in terms of working out what has transferred in terms of risk and responsibility, and then are honest in terms of what fees they're paying or offering to the dealers, then it can be positive. But it's not straightforward. You've got to remember the dealer's premises, the dealer's staff are there to serve not only the new car business that goes agency, but also the used car business and after sales. So it's not a simple one-size-fits-all calculation, and therefore there will always be some winners and losers within that, but broadly positive.
Yeah, I'm sure like the Brexit deal, they'll probably be negotiating after the final day as well, but we'll see how that pans out. Thanks to both of you for joining us for the Q&A. I'm afraid that sort of, we've run out of time, as it were, but there is of course chat rooms on the Automotive Management Live virtual platform, so I'd encourage anyone to go and seek out Stuart or Steve on there and see if you can engage them with any more questions. But that's it from us right now. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
Okay, that's a pleasure, and I'll head to the chat room.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Virtual coffee.